You're now live.
We are now live. I'm going to call the Senate Committee on Finance. Where is my agenda disappearing to? There it goes. And we do have two bills we're going to finish up today. We are not getting many bills from the House. So next week, I'm anticipating we moved the governor's appointments over so we could finish up on the TIF bill and S-25, which is kind of a last minute bill that's coming through. And then next week, I think we'll start just getting a walkthrough of what's in the big telecom bill so we can kind of get a head start on that, at least, know what's there. And I've asked Faith to see if Ways and Means did pass out a corporate tax and cloud tax bill. I know they've been working on it and the chair anticipated it sending it to us. So if that's out, we can start taking testimony. We've never done the work on the cloud tax that the other body has done. They usually send us the cloud tax like the last week of the session, and we're scrambling. So this year, I think since we seem to have a little flex time, it's not as busy as usual, we will take some testimony on the cloud tax. So, and that's, only if it's out or coming out. So Stephen Whitaker asked if he could talk about the approval of Commissioner Tierney's appointment. And I told him he could have 10 minutes. And so, Steve, the floor is yours.
I'd be willing to wait until I had two more members of the committee because I'm up against pretty insurmountable odds to argue that Commissioner Tierney should not be confirmed, but I will leave it to your discretion whether to call me back with more than 10 minutes because I have a wealth of knowledge and facts to back up my assertion.
Yes, and I think we've all gotten a lot of written information from you. And I'm not sure, I've got people with the pro tem and with another committee, and they might not show up here until 2:00, which makes this.
The best I can hope for is that you'll take what I tell you seriously enough to investigate it further, have your staff validate it, and then decide whether or not now is the time to affect some change in the department. I'm Stephen Whitaker, for the record, from Montpelier. I've been working on the issues of telecommunications planning and accountability since the early 90s, when the first Vermont Telecommunications Agreement came up for renewal, and I was the one to discover that the telecommunications plan was missing, and the statute required that the telecommunications plan be evaluated for compatibility or consistency with the telecommunications contract. That went down in flames. The legislature formed a special summer study committee to investigate the telecom plan, and most importantly, they postponed action on the Public Service Board's review of any incentive regulation by the ILECs until that review was completed. We're in a similar situation today, only the stakes are far higher. With the broadband investments and the federal money coming, we need to seriously evaluate whether now is the time to restore the committee's prerogative to reject a commissioner. I've heard often, as have others from you, Madam Chair, that it's meaningless for you to reject a committee commissioner assignment because of one incident where a governor reappointed the same one. I've spoken with some members of your committee about you appending to a bill this session a prohibition on reconsideration or reappointment of the same appointee once the Senate has rejected a commissioner. If you don't do that, it basically makes a frivolous exercise, meaningless exercise in going through the motions of confirmation when someone as ill-suited to the task has created such a track record. So getting into specifics, it's about accountability. The commissioner's accountability should be with this committee of jurisdiction, but this committee rarely has time to do much but scratch the surface or rub the feather on the depth of the issues that you're tackling around telecommunications and public safety accountability. The current commissioner is extremely dismissive of all of the entities that she has to interact with, the public, even her own Telecommunications and Connectivity Advisory Board. They are not allowed to meet unless the department approves of the chairman calling a meeting. Chairman Snedeker will not call a meeting unless he gets permission from Clay, and Clay from Jim Porter, and Jim Porter from June Tierney. So it's a farce. They prevent guidance and advice that's supposed to be guiding the telecommunications plan and connectivity initiative, and instead it's a dismissed tool. The annual hearings. The commissioner is required by statute 202F to participate in an annual public hearing of the Telecommunications and Connectivity Advisory Board to take public input on the connectivity initiative and the telecommunications planning. In the 5 years since you have created that connectivity initiative and put the VTA into mothballs, not 1 year has that hearing ever been held. And they've been reminded again and again. They did attempt to schedule one, and I caught wind of it from an inside source. No press had been notified. I was the only one there, and they agreed upon my appeal to the Telecommunications and Connectivity Advisory Board to do a do-over. That was January a year ago, and that do-over still has not happened. So you're dealing with the poster child of an unaccountable commissioner. The 10-year plan, you've also heard plenty about that. The 2014 plan was not on her watch, but she was well aware and made aware by Jim Porter that they had skipped public hearings on the final draft. They went ahead and adopted it anyway. Then they had the clever idea to call the 2018 first draft a final draft in an attempt to circumvent the process and the public participation and scrutiny of that plan. The legislature, in its wisdom, declined to meet jointly so they could not check off the box and adopt yet another incomplete, illegal, and deficient plan. The incentive regulation plan for Consolidated expires this coming July, yet the commissioner made no mention of that to you when you considered pushing out the due date for the 10-year plan until June 30 of this year, leaving not enough time for the Public Utilities Commission, one, to be assured that there's a plan adopted by then, because if the plan is inadequate, I suspect the legislature's only strategy is to not meet jointly, because currently the law allows them to adopt the plan regardless of its deficiencies only after the last checkbox, which is your committee meeting jointly with House Energy and Tech. So if the plan is deficient, as I and Senator Brock fully anticipate it might be, then you have no choice but to not meet, in which case the incentive reg plan needs to be suspended until a 10-year plan is completed for it to be measured for consistency with. You're often told by the commissioner that you have no jurisdiction over wireless, you have no jurisdiction over cable, and those simply are not true. I have provided in testimony filed with your committee and with the Public Utilities Commission and with the Telecommunications and Connectivity Advisory Board. There's policy paper by the FCC in 2014 said that when it comes to 911, we share jurisdiction with the municipalities, the states and counties and cities, because we are talking about public safety when voice over IP furnished through the cable company or over from a fiber carrier is not designed to be resilient and hardened enough to deliver calls, especially during extended power outages. And we do have jurisdiction to regulate that, and this commissioner elects not to. And dissuades the committee from asking any questions or exploring whether we should have jurisdiction in order to keep our constituents safe. The same over wireless, but yet we do have jurisdiction over wireless siting and tower permits and tower permit conditions. We could require generators. We could require towers hardened to a specific standard that they won't blow down in a storm. Yet we don't. When the legislature required the commissioner to petition the PUC for hearings on the impact of power outages on 911 calling, the commissioner, the department, advised you narrow the language to only residential fixed line powered customers. And why would you not want to be concerned with the power going out in a nursing home or a hospital or a school not being able to make phone calls? So the PUC accommodated the narrow language on petition from the department and did a half, not even a half an effort to investigate and come up with remedies and solutions and hardening to make sure 911 calls go through. The 911 jurisdiction, the governor's counsel now was former assistant attorney general, said that the PUC cannot look into the reliability of the 911 system because the statute as currently worded is interpreted to give the 911 board exclusive jurisdiction. Only they have no staff, they have no lawyers, they have no technical experts. Those are typically residing in or retained by the department or the board. So if you don't have the board and the department arguing on behalf of and investigating the reliability of the 911 system, you're putting everyone at risk. And these are the direct subjects of jurisdiction of your committee, and you've neglected them despite my bringing them to you for year after year. So the Emergency Broadband Action Plan was a farce of a document of a bunch of ideas that had been thrown around the department, and yet it was put forth as if it had some statutory authority. The Telecommunications and Connectivity Advisory Board voted once not to approve it, and a second time voted not to even consider recommending or approving its adoption. And yet the commissioner continues to reference it because it includes her lame idea for a reverse auction to cut the CUDs out and to reward Comcast and Consolidated and the incumbents. She continues to rely on that and pitch it as if it's a legal document. It is not. It is not a telecom plan. It has no standing or authority, and yet it's presented as if it is our policy. That feedback plan, for short, Emergency Broadband Action Plan, fails to address many of the goals in 202 statute, 202C policy and goals, specifically competition, mobile wireless coverage everywhere, open access to shared facilities and shared towers. None of those things are addressed in that, and yet it's considered as a policy guiding for the department. The department is bamboozling both this committee of jurisdiction and the public with this. The Green Mountain Power deal is a backdoor attempt to allow the further creation of 25/3 cable line extensions with public subsidies built into the electric rate base, and it was not approved or even reviewed by the Telecommunications and Connectivity Advisory Board. It has never been in a 10-year telecom plan, and yet the department just petitioned with the Green Mountain Power and Vermont Electric Co-op to have it approved and succeeded in pulling that 15, 17, 20-something million. I don't know the combined value of the ceiling. 15 million for Green Mountain Power and some similar number of millions for Vermont Electric as a way to allow them to allow Comcast to accept $2,000 per address to build line extensions in direct contravention and circumvention of the will of this committee. Pole hygiene, there is no enforcement or even monitoring of the reckless and hazardous accumulation of hardware and wires dangling against each other's wires into the public space, along the sidewalks, over the streets. There's absolutely no regulation by the department or the board of the hazardous conditions being created by these years and years of build-out. In the Verizon case, when they sold to Fairpoint, there was $1 million escrow required to be set aside to address the double poles. It has not been addressed, and it has only been compounded. Now Fairpoint sold to Consolidated. Consolidated sold its half interest in the poles to Green Mountain Power, and no provision has been made. As early as yesterday, as recent as yesterday, on School Street in Montpelier, Eustis Cable, on behalf of Consolidated, is continuing to connect fiber to a pole that is sitting right next to the new pole, but they're continuing to attach new facilities to the old pole when all of that old pole facility should have been transferred 10 years ago and the double pole removed. This is something that is the jurisdiction of your committee, I'll say. Coverage Co. Upon the demise of Coverage Co., due to the department siding with the carriers to disconnect the service, despite the risk it put the public in not being able to make 911 calls on those rural roads, and defending Consolidated's right to terminate all the DSL connections that were serving those backhaul, after we had just accomplished getting the electric turned back on for the public safety, the department was fighting on the wrong side of that issue. You then required them to do an after-action report and an analysis of whether a public subsidy is warranted to keep mobile wireless coverage on the rural roads. The department failed miserably in not doing the analysis required by the legislature. The Connectivity Division has specific mobile wireless coverage as part of their scope, and yet they have not required any addressing of the mobile wireless coverage in any of the grants from the Connectivity Division or the Coronavirus Relief Fund awards. Nor have they dealt with competition, which continues. They're continuing to subsidize the increasing scope of monopolies to the detriment of the public and the people. And these issues have been raised again and again, and your commissioner is smooth talking enough, and your committee is too busy to dig in and realize that this commissioner is not good for the public. Right-of-way charges. The department is a affiliated party to the statutory section in 19 VSA that requires charging broadband providers for use of the right-of-way. That responsibility was transferred to VTrans when the VTA was put into mothballs. And after 5 years, they are allowed to grant a waiver of those charges for 5 years, according to the statute. I believe it's maybe 56A or something like that. I can provide it for you. After 5 years, the department and VTrans together have to do an evaluation of the basis of any rational basis for a waiver and commit that to writing. Here we are, 6 years. We still don't have any waivers, and you were told in your committee last week, I believe, or the week before, by Robert White, that they are not charging for use of the right-of-way, even though the statute says you shall charge broadband providers for use of the right-of-way. Yesterday, I finally was able to investigate the records out at archives that demonstrate they are charging for use of the right-of-way, but only the railroad right-of-ways. The spreadsheet I got from the department shows they've taken in $860,000 in revenue from use of the right-of-way. But that means they're leaving many more millions on the table by not adhering to statute and either granting waivers or charging the broadband providers for use of the right-of-way. Is this an example of a diligent, accountable Commissioner of Public Service? The telephone personal property tax similarly has not been equitably collected among providers other than Waitsfield Baston and VTEL, and possibly Consolidated, but to the degree it's pegged to the federal depreciation schedules, after 1 year, the value of all the infrastructure is depreciated to zero, which is not good for the public, and it forfeits an incentive for us to, for instance, offer an incentive to Consolidated to share their fiber on an open access basis in exchange for a property tax exemption. But if they've already depreciated the fiber to zero, that's not much of an incentive. The department has not had a telecommunications engineer on staff since 2004, when the late Charlie Larkin, may he rest in peace, who was my best friend and ally in developing the capacity and the passion with which I pursue these issues. I'm hoping to make him proud someday, but I sure need your help. The public advocate, the person who represents and pretends to be the public advocate, when I tried to save Vermont Interactive Television from dismantling by the state colleges, Jim Porter got on the stand and lied and said that he wasn't sure whether we did hearings on a final draft of the telecom plan. And I've provided members of your committee with transcripts of 4 or 5 different hearings where Charlie and I told him that they needed to have hearings on a final draft, and this was not a final draft. This commissioner and Jim Porter and his wife need to go, and it's time for this committee to take that seriously and exercise your obligation under your oath to begin to remedy that department. I don't know how deep it goes, but you need a new commissioner in there to start house cleaning. Deerfield Wind, the department came out on the wrong side of that and did not take care to see that the measurements that were required for the sound levels of the Deerfield Wind project were done without counting as background radiation the Searsburg wind towers, which are going to be going away soon. Those needed to be off for you to get accurate noise measurements off the Deerfield project and not just let it skew the data. Similarly, when the rules were adopted by the PUC for wind noise, they opted for a weighted measurement technique, which is weighted for the audible range of the human ear, not the full the audible impacts in the infrasound dimensions, which are actually causing ear imbalance, nausea, and other health effects. You need to use C-weighted or Z-weighted full spectrum audio measurement if you're going to really calculate the impact of those wind machines. The public advocate is required to be hired under a 226A contract, which the VTA agreement was, the Vermont Telecommunications Agreement, in 1989, and attempted to be renewed in 1992. It went down in flames and was withdrawn after a real telecom plan was done under supervision of the Joint Legislative Telecommunications Committee. Since then, they immediately passed incentive regulation under 226B, which is a backdoor attempt, only there's no public advocate hired. Now more than ever, you need a public advocate to pick up the slack for what the department has failed to do for year after year after year, and to be representing the public interest in the next review of an incentive reg plan. I know in the House side...
Steve, you're way over 10 minutes, so I'm going to ask you to kind of finish up in 5 and then give us some written testimony, because this is a lot to absorb.
I know it's a lot. I'll give you a transcript of my comments. I'm nearly through.
Okay.
So what I'm asking is that due to the 10-year telecommunications plan still not being done and likely not being done to satisfaction by June, you need to pass a bill similar to what passed in 92, which created a summer study committee and postponed action, prohibited the PUC from PSB at the time from reviewing any incentive reg plan, alternative regulation plan, until the telecommunications plan was complete. We are backed against the same wall now, and you need to take that action to make sure that Consolidated does not sneak out the door with another multi-year incentive reg plan before the telecom plan is finished and found to be consistent with it. That is our only hope of getting open access to this fiber that was publicly funded and that will enable us to complete the state with wall-to-wall fiber with the available federal funds. I can't stress that point more importantly. Secondly, we may need to petition the PUC to revisit the orders just granted, the permission to build tens of millions into the rate base of the electric utilities for pole make-ready to benefit less than 100 carriage. We cannot allow Comcast and Charter to build less than fiber speed. That violates the state policy of not soon outmoded 100 by 2024 and ubiquitous fiber access at those speeds to all at E911 addresses. Krista Shute, who was a staffer at the Vermont Telecommunications Authority. She's now an attorney. She's working for the Public Advocate's Office in New Hampshire. She's most knowledgeable about what needs the Vermont fiber environment. She also recommended that structure, which in testimony to the House Committee, that an independent advocate office be placed under the administrative support of the Public Utilities Commission, no longer compromised by the lawyers and the perjurers in the department. That's something you could explore right away, and that independent public advocate could hit the ground running when this incentive reg plan gets filed. The VTA bills, both, will still rely on the Department of Public Service for the next, 6 months at least. It's similar with 911. The department has not backed up and supported 911 to address power outage vulnerabilities, dead battery vulnerabilities when you're dealing with a fiber-connected customer. We are creating an increasing hazard by this rapid broadband build-out, having not addressed these critical issues that the department continues to ignore. So I think that's probably enough for now. I appreciate the extra few minutes you granted. I will provide you a transcript.
All right. Any questions for Steve? Let me get back on here. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you. And Steve, if you get that to us, then we can start trying to get some categories to explore.
Oh, Madam Chair, can I raise one minute, one brief issue I forgot, a very important one. The department has authority under 202D to require information from the utilities. They are not exercising that, which means that's why we will not get an adequate telecom plan. They're using the 202E authority that was created with the Connectivity Division that allows them to take voluntarily supplied information under non-disclosure agreements. You need to specifically require the department to exercise its 202D authority to get the fiber locations, the splice boxes, etc., in order to have a credible telecom plan by June or thereafter. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Committee. We lost Becky for the moment. I think she's going to pop back in.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah. Many of the things that you spoke about today are not new by any means. You've raised them a number of times before, and in a number of cases, you've raised them directly with the department. Have you gotten any written responses to any of the points that you've raised, either pro or con or neutral? And if so, could you share them with us, the responses that you got?
I've gotten one substantive response, and that was in regard to the missing broadband action plan, and the department's excuse signed by the commissioner was that because the governor hadn't appointed enough people to the Telecommunications and Connectivity Advisory Board, they couldn't get a quorum, so they couldn't meet and give her any guidance as if she would have listened to it. And therefore, that was their excuse for not writing the broadband action plan.
And you've gotten no response to any of the other issues that you've raised with them?
No, I have not. And I filed them with the PUC as well, which the department was a party in those dockets. The department neither supported nor rebutted any of them.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? If not,
I had a question for Randy, for Senator Brock.
pardon?
I had a question for Senator Brock.
If Senator Brock chooses to be interrogated.
No, no one on this committee understands the multitude of different issues that better than the senator. And I just, I was shocked by the length and detail and suggested numerous, I'm trying to, shortcomings, just to be polite, of what we're dealing with. And Senator Brock, do you?
Well, there are a number of issues, obviously, that have been raised before, and they're in various levels of difficulty in resolving. Some of them are issues that can be resolved legislatively. Some of them are technical issues that need to be resolved by people who are technical experts. In many cases, I know that they have been aware of them and have not come to the same conclusions that Mr. Whitaker has regarding their import or complexity. There are some things, though, that I think we can do. There are a number of things that he's raised that are dealt with in the draft telecommunications bill. I do think that there are areas such as the 911 resiliency, which we certainly have talked about at length in this committee, that do need to be pursued further. I'm aware of the issue with the Telecommunications Advisory Board, but that is an advisory board and nothing more. It is not a body that substantively deals with and resolves issues per se. They are an advisor to the commissioner, and my understanding is that advice has largely been given. I think there's a dispute between Mr. Whitaker's view and the department's view of that. The right-of-way charge and whether or not is being collected is certainly an issue. Whether it will dictate a great deal of what this committee does is a question perhaps for the committee to decide. I do think we should address in our telecom bill the incentive regulation plan, because I agree that it is something that should be deferred until the VTA or whatever we ultimately do is up and running. And that's why I think it's important to get Mr. Whitaker's testimony down. And I think it would be useful for us to ask the department to respond to it on an item by item basis so that we have their view clearly in front of us.
That was my intent once I got it. I also intended to send it to Ledge Council for their interpretation. I don't believe Mr. Whitaker is an attorney, so I'd like to get their legal opinion about what's required and what isn't.
Right, and there are some differences that I have seen in terms of where the authority of the state extends that do somewhat differ from some of what Mr. Whitaker said, but I'd love to see something more from Ledge Council in that regard.
So Steve, if you would get that to us, if you can email it or mail it to Faith.
You'll have it this afternoon, Madam Chair.
Okay. Senator Sirotkin.
I'm just a little confused as to whether there is a public advocate in the department. The department's supposed to be an advocate for the public, but I've heard several comments here that makes me believe that there's no one in that position, or maybe their hands are tied. We have several examples in state government, I think, right now, where we have a separate individual or office like the healthcare advocate, the director of racial equality, where that really makes a difference, where there's someone who has some independence and who's a watchdog. And I don't know, Madam Chair, do you know what the status is of a public advocate within the Department of Public Service?
There is a public advocacy division within the Department of Public Service, and I believe Jim Porter is the head of it.
Okay. It
We'll
seems,
check on that.
it seems pretty seamless to me. I mean, I respect Jim Porter, but I never really hear any distinction between the department's position and Jim Porter's position. And that's something I think is unusual if you had a public advocate like some of the consumer public advocates in other states. You usually get some dissension between the regulatory agency and the public advocate. I'd like to look into that.
Yeah, okay. And some of those are beyond our scope. I believe the entire agency is charged with being a public advocate. That's
Correct.
why it was established, to represent ratepayers before the PUC. And maybe things have been changing. We did an extensive bill trying to make it more user-friendly since it now isn't just utility attorneys arguing with utility attorneys, but we can go back and look at that. We've got Becky back, and I'm going to try and move us on. We definitely, we're going to look at the telecom bill next week that's headed our way, and send me or Faith or both of us, some subjects or individuals you'd like to hear from. And then some of it gets into division of power, and we have had this issue before with how much power we have to make the executive branch do what we want.
Well, yes, Madam Chair, but the testimony we heard suggests that there are frequent violations of law, and the
Right, we have
problems are not
we-
limited to the commissioner
Right.
that is sitting there today.
No.
There's a long history of this, but as we're sitting here with a pile
Oh.
of money and the laws,
Senator, I was hoping
Yeah.
we'd gotten over that,
so
because it was in this committee for about 2 years. I think
but
we can't keep, we have to go forward. I am not going to go back and rehash things that happened in 1967 or 87 or 97. What we need to do is decide what's the best course to take going forward. I think we also have to take responsibility for providing resources. It's good to say so-and-so hasn't done this, but if we don't provide the staffing and the material and the money to do it, then we have some culpability. So we're going to have a lovely discussion. I
Chair, I
can't,
can-
You are correct,
You know,
Madam Chair. We
they're
have a lot of
always-
responsibility.
okay,
There are a
Senator
number
Brock.
of things the department has not done, and we're well
Yes.
aware of it. And typically, they haven't done it because they haven't been resourced to do it. But, one of my biggest criticism is they haven't come to us and said so. They haven't raised the alarm, and that may be how the administration in some cases works. But, we have to be diligent. The public advocacy issue that Senator McDonald raised is a good one. There is a public advocacy department, and that's the function of it, is to be the advocate for the ratepayer before the Public Service Commission, the Public Utilities Commission, et cetera. They're supposed to do an annual report. The last annual report the department did was in 2018, and they haven't done an annual report, at least published it on their website since then. And in
Well, then we need
2007,
to get
they
that.
only did a draft report. And I mean, that's characteristic of what we see from the
Yeah.
Public Service Department.
that is not acceptable. I mean, to have a draft and let it hit. So we are way behind time now. So we're going to move forward and next week, we've got time because nothing is coming to us from anybody. So we will have some time to take this up. And it sounds like we could use a Department of Public Service 101, and I'm not sure who to ask for that, but we'll try just to find out the history, what it's supposed to do. I am not sure what this alternative rate is, but I most certainly want to find that out before July. And perhaps we can get folks from the Public Utility Commission to come down and talk to us. So with that, we've got Becky back, and I've seen Karen Horn and Megan Sullivan both pop in and out here. The first question for the committee, I asked Rebecca to do 2 sets of the bill. One was the bill as we discussed yesterday, and then I asked to have a bunch of the clarifying language. And I asked her yesterday, there's a couple, like you can use the proceeds of the bond to pay the interest until you've got something to tax to pay the bond. That was one of the issues in St. Albans. And yesterday I asked Becky to put that, and there were one or two others into this bill, because that lack of clarity in language is still there. So, and I asked her yesterday if she could to draft a bill with everything we did last week to clarify the TIF statute, since this does have changes to the TIF statute, so we can put it in. And I'm just want to know, is the committee interested in going there or just stick with what we've got? I think perhaps everybody but Senator Hardy was part of that discussion. Senator Sirotkin. You're muted, Senator.
I wanted to say that on these kind of issues that came to your committee from our committee, we specifically discussed these things and said, this is a finance committee issue. So we passed it along without a hard decision on things like the debt service things, the bonding in advance, in anticipation, or I forget the terminology, but there were several issues where we said we didn't want to make a hard decision because we had dealt with those in finance last year. So
Right.
even though you see it in the bill before you, we're not firm on this and we're very deferential to this committee.
Okay, so maybe we'll ask Becky to walk through that. Senator Pearson?
I thought I know we did a few tweaks to the TIF, the current TIF program by the end of the year. For instance, we gave some people some extensions. So I guess I want to make sure that we didn't put the language that we had worked on that now we're contemplating here into law in other vehicles last year, because I know we did some pieces, but.
Yeah, so I can explain. So last year there was a bill S-191, which was in your committee, and it made a few changes to the TIF program. There's separately another bill to extend the, I believe, the debt incurrence period for a specific town that made it out of your committee and passed as law, but the other changes were not made. And I have a list of what those are, so that might
Okay,
be helpful to know if you want to sort of get into that level of detail right now.
right.
So first there was a language that clarifies that, so this is all for TIF districts. So we're kind of putting aside.
Right, not many TIFs. We're not
yeah.
changing that at this point.
Yeah, so there was language clarifying that any parcel within a district shall be located wholly within the boundaries of a district, and no boundary adjustments can be made after a TIF district plan has been approved. So that was something raised by the auditor about adjustments to boundaries and whether there was parcels that were sort of half in and out. Second, there was language addressing a municipality that has a TIF district and a tax stabilization agreement, that the increment is calculated on the assessed value of the property and not the stabilized value. Third, there was language clarifying what happens if the property value in the district decreases in comparison to the original taxable value, and what has to be paid back to the ed fund.
That was the fire, right? That if you would, I remember the example of if it burned down.
Yes, or if there's a hole in the ground somewhere for.
Oh, I wonder where that might be.
So, and then last was language authorizing FEPC to adopt rules to clarify how improvements are done in a brownfield. And then you also mentioned the other ones about the bond anticipation notes and the use of debt service, how to pay for debt service for a 5-year period. So that's what the new language would address. I've also drafted another amendment that just deals with changing the mini TIFs to 10,
Yeah.
no more than 10 and 2 per year for a 5-year period. And as part of that, the committee had also, I think, come to the decision they wanted to do the bond anticipation note and the debt service payments for TIF district. So I've one amendment that just deals with sort of those 3 changes, and the other amendment that deals with those 3 and the other ones that list that I just mentioned.
Okay, Megan, do you have any thoughts on this? How, you've been a year without clarification, but I don't think we've
Yeah.
been doing a lot of TIF work either, so.
Yeah, we really would love to see this clarification happen. It is causing issues not to know where to go with some of these questions. The city of St. Albans needs to move forward with their financing. The letter that we got from the Joint Fiscal Committee said, no more decisions. So we're sort of, we take, at this
That's
point,
right.
we take that to mean we can move forward with St. Albans so that they're not stuck in this no man's land indefinitely. But there are other communities that are awaiting this clarification, both on the debt service reserve fund as well as the bond anticipation notes. There's no question that bond anticipation notes are allowed in tax increment financing. It's just whether or not they constitute the first incurrence of debt or last incurrence of debt. It's not an issue of whether or not you can use those tools. It's just, do they count for incurring debt technically? So as we're reaching the end of a few different districts, and there are at the end of their debt incurrence period, that clarification is important for them. So we would love to see language move forward with clarifying those pieces of the TIF district program.
Okay, so Becky, why don't you walk us through the TIF section of the more comprehensive bill? And then if you can share your screen, we can kind of read what we're doing. And this is everything that we did last year. Is there a thing on improvements? Remember, there was a big issue about they brought dirt in, or they paid dirt in
I believe
St.
that was
Albans?
the
That the
brownfield.
brownfields?
Yeah,
Okay,
the dirt. I remember we
dirt.
talked about that for a while.
Yep.
lots
There
of dirt.
was the dirt that was removed was replaced with load-bearing dirt.
That's right.
I will share my screen.
And that was done with TIF financing, and the auditor thought it should have had private
They
finance,
should have replaced the non-load bearing dirt, I guess.
non-load bearing dirt. Anyway, we decided that we would do that. Okay, Becky, let's go.
Okay. Great. So I had labeled this as just option B. Sorry, Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. This is the committee amendment to S33. So in section 2 of the bill right now, where there's language about sort of a technical amendment about changing the 6 approved TIF districts to 4. It's the same section of law where a lot of the changes were made in last year's bill. So I just had to amend that section 2 in your bill to add in those changes.
Okay.
So first, I'm just going to scroll down to the first change on page 2 is relating to the when a municipality has a TIF district and a tax stabilization agreement. So this says that notwithstanding any other provision of law, if a municipality has entered into an agreement that reduces their education property tax liability under this chapter, meaning the tax stabilization agreements, and the municipality has a TIF district, the municipality's municipal and education tax increment shall be calculated based on the assessed value of the properties in the municipality's grand list and not on the stabilized value.
Okay. And that is protective of the ed fund, right?
Yes, I think the issue that was brought was that you were getting less money being paid to the ed fund because it was being based off of a lower stabilized value for those properties and not the assessed values.
That's right. The stabilized property is the value going in. It's any value above that that is used to pay the bond. And this says if I'm going to do a tax stabilization agreement, I have to use it on the present assessed value, not on that what could be several year old frozen value. I think,
Ma-
okay.
Madam Chair, that would be consistent with any municipality seeking a tax stabilization agreement. Such an agreement does not, in law, does not permit the town to say, now we can send less money to the ed fund than we used to send.
Right.
And the current law is deficient in that regard for TIFs and it needs to be corrected. Is that what we're hearing?
I think so. It
Thank
says
you.
it's not on the frozen value at the beginning of the TIF district. It is on the present assessed value.
I think, sorry, I'm just, wasn't totally prepared to talk about this piece. So I'm remembering, but it's more about the stabilized value. If the stabilized value on the municipal side is lower, then you're having a lower percentage of municipal funds going into the TIF fund than you otherwise would, which means there's more of a dependence on the education fund increment in those debt payments, meaning there's less at the end. If there's going to be disbursement, there would be less for the education fund disbursement.
You can't stabilize ed taxes, right?
You can, but the municipality has to make it
Has
up.
to pay it,
Yeah.
yeah. You can't
Yeah.
pay less into the ed fund, and this is just making
So
sure.
it's really about the impact that stabilizing the municipal side has.
Okay. The ed fund is held harmless. Okay, any other questions? If not, let's move on.
Okay, so then moving on to page 3,
business.
this was in the bill as given to your committee about the change to the 6 to 4 districts. I'm just repeating it here because I had to strike out that entire section. So you'll see that change on line 1 and line 13, and then also line 17 and 18 is just clarifying that not one more TIF per district in Bennington County and Washington County.
And this is all,
That
this
was
is all
language.
just reflective of changes we've made previously.
This was what just passed out of Senate Economic Development. It was in the bill as reported to you. I just had to repeat it here because I am amending the
Okay.
section of law for all of these other changes.
Becky, is that this part that we're on is still the sort of existing TIFs, right? Not the new.
This is all, this is all
Yeah.
existing TIFs right now.
Okay.
So for existing TIFs in the TIF statute, the next change is on line 20, which says that
Madam Chair,
Yes.
what's the problem that is seeking to be solved by limiting the TIF districts?
so this is a technical change. A few years ago, you all decided to limit it. The legislature decided to limit it to 6 more TIFs that could be approved. Since that time, 2 more have been approved, Montpelier and Bennington. So this is just updating the law to reflect that of the 6 that were allowed, you have done 2 of them. So there's only 4 more left.
Okay.
So why are we limiting,
Limiting-
Madam Chair, why are we limiting TIF districts?
We are limiting them to, as part of the compromise, to limit the impact on the ed fund. This has been negotiated. This was hotly negotiated.
Okay, well, but in the last couple of days, I've been told that the ed fund isn't being impacted and that there is no,
It
is no-
is,
okay.
okay. And again, we get back to tenants' belief.
okay,
If you believe that all of that growth would go somewhere else in the state, then the ed fund is being impacted.
okay,
Okay.
no, okay. And the
All right.
answer, I accept the answer. Yep.
Okay, and so we limited the number. So it's not a Wild West show out there. All right, let's keep going.
Okay, so page 3, line 20, this is dealing when there's a decrease in the value of the property. So in any year that the assessed value of property in a district decreases in comparison to that original taxable value, a municipality shall pay the amount equal to the tax calculated based on the original taxable value to the ed fund. So this is just saying sort of no matter what, that's what the municipality is responsible for, even if the value decreases.
So if they tear down the building and leave a big hole, the risk is on the town. The town has to pay the value it was paying when there was something there, maybe somewhat dilapidated, and there's an interim period sometimes between when you tear it down and you build something new. So it's not going to go below the original value. At least for some time. Okay.
Okay, so on page 4, this is the change starting on line 8 for the brownfields. So under the project criteria, that one of the criteria is that the project will affect the remediation and redevelopment of a brownfield located within the district. So this says that in case of a brownfield, BEPC is authorized to adopt rules to clarify what a reasonable improvement is to remediate and stimulate the development or redevelopment in the district.
Okay. Any questions? Let's go. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we can move on.
Okay, the next instance of amendment is going to the pilot program now. So I made just a technical change here. In the definition of coordinating agency, there was a reference to districts and it should have been projects. So the first reference here to striking out district and inserting project is just cleaning up that language there. And then there's a new subsection B added at the top of page 5, and this is the substance of what you all changed for the projects. So this is saying, this is changing it from 6 years to 5 years, which was an error. So it's January 1st, 2022 until the end of December 2026. There's BEPC is allowed to approve a total of not more than 10 TIF projects with not more than 2 projects per year, provided that there shall not be more than 1 project per municipality. Okay.
Questions? Okay, keep going.
Okay, so the third instance of amendment, sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
I may be my half-inch away from the microphone.
Okay.
That seems to put me in or out.
So now we're switching away from TIF projects back to TIF districts, and it's just simply because of the way the bill is ordered, the order of the sections. But I'm adding a new section here to address some definitions for TIF districts, and these are what you've discussed already. So for the definition of improvement, starting on line 16, this is allowing for the funding of debt service payments for a period of up to 5 years, beginning on which the first debt is incurred for TIF districts. You have allowed that in the underlying bill for TIF projects. And then the same with the definition of financing for TIF districts, page 6, the bond anticipation notes, you're allowing for this to be done for TIF districts during the 4th or 10th year for a district to incur debt, but the permanent financing has to be done not more than 1 year after issuing the bond anticipation note.
Okay.
And then I
Becky
believe,
or Madam Chair.
Yes.
what is the significance of the 4th or the 10th year?
So a municipality has up to 5 years to incur their first instance of debt. They can get an extension to 10 years. And so this is trying to track sort of I believe Megan, that's correct, is tracking sort of when they
Yeah, I
should
think
be
we'd
have-
actually want to say during the 5th year or the 10th year.
Okay, I just used the language from last year, so.
Oh, did it say? So a district has 5 years to incur their first debt, but the process of incurring debt can be take a lot of time because you have to first go to voters, get voter approval, and then you need to go to the bond bank, and the bond bank has a winter sale sometimes, most of the time, and a summer sale. So if you get approval, let's say in November from voters, you have to turn around very quickly in order to make the bond bank's winter sale. More likely you're going to go to the summer sale. If your 5th year that you can incur debt ends March 31st of a year, it may be the previous March that you actually have to get voter approval, and it'll take it a whole additional year and before you can actually incur the debt. So the idea here is that a bond anticipation note, as long as it's assumed into permanent financing in a year, is a way to say, we've gotten voter approval, we're incurring the debt with the intention of going to the bond bank at the earliest opportunity without missing that deadline. Or for the last incurrence of debt, it allows you to go to voters during your 10th year and still incur the debt slightly after the 10th year by issuing a bond anticipation note in the 10th year, again, as long as it's assumed into permanent financing within a year. What we don't want is people taking out bond anticipation notes to buy themselves 2 or 3 or 4 years of extra time.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm just, thank you for the explanation, and it makes sense. I'm just wondering, it seems incongruent to have 4th and 10th. It's either should be 4th and 9th or 5th and 10th. It seems to me.
I think it should be 5th and 10th.
Does sound like it should work.
Madam Chair,
Thank you.
Senator Sirotkin.
sort of sounds like shall and may.
Yes, it's important.
That was important. Very good catch. Now I have a basic question here. It seems like wouldn't it be simpler to just, what's the reason why we just don't give people 6 and 11 years as opposed to allowing them to go for an extension for 1 year to get another different kind of note?
The idea was to get full payment into if you don't bond for the 10th year, you're then 30 years out before that bond is paid off. So I think it was to keep it compact.
I think if you went to 6 and 11, you'd run into the same issue with then people sneaking up on their 6th year and saying, if we issue a bond anticipation note, you could do that, but I think this provides them, okay, you can do a bond anticipation note. You would have had to have received your voter approval, and you can do a bond anticipation note in that 5th year, but it has to be part of permanent financing within 1 year.
Can't do it and then wait 5 years to let the bond.
Right, because the issue is the timing of both municipal elections and when the bond bank issues bonds. And no matter when you put it, you're going to have that problem. It's just a matter of making sure that the numbers in this draft coincide with the numbers of when they can issue the bonds.
Yeah. And this, I believe the question was, there were bond anticipation notes and whether or not was that the first issuance of debt or wasn't it? This came up in St. Albans and it wasn't clear. And so we made it clear. You can do this, but only if you get your bond within a year. You
This
know,
was actually not a St. Albans issue. This was something that came up
Okay.
during the rulemaking. As VEPSI was looking to update the rule, this came
Okay.
up. So it was a matter of, can we fix this within the existing TIF rule, or does it need to be through statute?
Okay. It keeps things tight. And you can always come back to the legislature. We had one that did, and we extended it. Okay, let's move.
Okay, so the next amendment is dealing with, it's amending 24 VSA 1895 on TIF districts again. And this is the last change here is to, it's with respect to the boundaries of a district, that a parcel has to be wholly within the boundaries of a district, and it can't be adjusted after the TIF district plan has been approved.
No redistricting.
Right. And that has come up. Is this the one with South Burlington that had thought they could just expand further if things went well, and they had a massive expansion? So I think this says, no, you have to go back and do a separate TIF district. You can't just keep growing.
So we have not had a district that has expanded their boundary, but it was South Burlington that testified before the legislature, before this committee last year, requesting that boundary adjustments be allowed through the substantial change process.
Yeah, and it was a substantial change. Okay, let's go forward if there's no questions here.
Sure, I'm all done with the changes. There's just that the sections would be renumbered once you add all these in to the bill. But that was the extent of everything you decided on the TIF, the mini TIFs, as well as including everything this committee discussed last year, clarifying changes for TIF districts.
One change we made to the mini TIFs was 2 per year for 5 years, which got us to a cap of 10 instead of 15, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Same time frame. And
Would you like me to
Is-
stop the share or?
yeah, committee. If I can see you all, what are you thinking? Nobody's thinking. Senator Hardy. Good to see somebody's thinking.
I'm thinking, I think we should add these changes into the bill. I mean, based on what Senator Sorokin was saying about how his committee was sort of deferring to us to make changes, and hearing Megan say that VEPSI is supportive of them, it seems they all seem logical and clarifying to me.
Well, I'm glad to hear Senator Hardy say that, because I think that's in concurrence with what 5 members of the committee came up with last year. This is essentially doing what finance did last year.
We did. It came out. Okay, well, Senator Bray, you weren't here last year, but you weren't here for a bunch of this either. So what
No,
do you?
sorry. I was down the hall, then I got a note from Faith said all done. I thought, wow, they really knocked it all out of the park. Then I got another note that said, no, but we're meeting on S33. So
Yes, we are.
I-
We had Mr.
back
Whitaker in for the first half hour. So
yeah. No, these seem like good edits, and I'm glad it feels to me like we're tuning it up and getting ready to ship it. And from my point of view, I'd love to see us do this. So.
okay. I think any further discussion? I think we're
Could
ready.
I ask one question?
Yeah.
So if no more than 2 per year, that means if we were to say have 1 in year 1 because people are getting things ready, we wouldn't be able to use that extra one another year, right? It would be 2 were out.
Uh,
10 total, no more than 2 per year, or,
That's
I
what
guess
we
that's just what I'm-
said.
okay.
I think the concern was we didn't want to do 10 in 1 year and then have 5 years with nothing. And we're also concerned about your ability to process 10 in 1 year. So to Pearson.
Well, I'm glad Megan brought this up because we sort of all agreed to compromise on 10. And then there was this somehow language about per year or 2 per year floated in there. Do we really care? We don't kind of want it all at once. And we want this to be modest. So we've capped it at 10. What is the benefit of stretching it out in that way? I mean, if there were, let's say, 10 in the next 2 years, we would have the data and we would either decide, boy, these are really popular, or these are really popular and that's concerning, right? I guess I'm not clear why we need to stretch out the pilot.
I think part of it was workload.
And we can self-regulate that a bit with, you know, how our meeting schedule can fill up in terms of our workload. I think the workload was more a comment of adding 100 in 5 years. I would just hate for a community to lose out because we hit 2 if we had an extra space from the year before.
You know, I think there may be a compromise here. Because I think there's a little bit of politics in this in terms of them all hitting at once and how it's going to be viewed. So what if we said no more than 10 over 5 years and no more than 3 per year in any given year?
Works. And if it, you know, if these are hugely successful, we need to have some time to see that they're completed and are successful.
Right. That's what
Actually,
5 years.
yeah. Well, we won't know until we find out if they pay off the bonds in 20 years, if that's what they're doing. But it sounds like this might be a little more complicated financing. And this would be just a portion of that overall financing.
Can
Okay.
you repeat? I'm sorry, could you repeat what you proposed, Senator Sorokin?
It's sort of in the middle. It says the cumulative total over 5 years can't be more than 10, but you can do up to 3 in any given year.
Okay,
That
I'm
work?
okay with that if people are. That
Yep.
gives you a little more flexibility, Megan.
Okay.
And then do you want me to also make a change to the bond anticipation notes for the from fourth to fifth year?
It sounds like that would make it consistent if Megan thinks she does them. So if she thinks that's the way it should go. So if you do that,
I have it ready. It's draft 1.2, so I can send it
Okay.
to Faith now.
so are we ready for a motion on this one?
I'll move it.
Okay, first we need to move to amend.
Wait, can I ask Becky a question quick?
Yeah.
You said, or you had posted 2 different amendments. Is the other one just off the table now because we decided on this one?
Yeah, so the other one, this was the option B. So the other one
Okay.
had only 2 of the changes that were in this. This one was the bigger amendment. So
Okay.
It encompassed what was in the First Amendment.
Great.
First one just took the 2 that were done to mini TIFs and put them into major TIFs. This took the changes we made last year that didn't make it through, clarifying changes, and added it all into the TIF statute. Okay. All right. So I'm looking for a motion to amend, or is this a strike all?
That was my question. Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have a strike all before us?
It's not a strike all.
Okay. So we need to amend with draft 1.1,
1.2.
1.2.
0.2.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
I thought Michael moved.
Yeah.
Yeah, where's Michael?
Yeah, I'll move to amend.
Okay, Michael has moved to amend. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oh, say no.
No,
Okay, so that's 6-1-0. Okay, now we need a motion to approve as amended.
So moved.
Senator Saratkin has moved. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
no.
Okay, 6-1-0. And Senator Saratkin, can I assume you want to report this?
Okay, I will. Last time I remember I offered to report and you insisted upon being the reporter. So I was
Well,
expecting,
that was for that section, not for your mini tips.
okay,
I was the reporter for the clarifying one. I
Okay.
was all ready. I was prepared and we went home.
Okay.
It was supposed to be on the floor that day.
Okay.
If you want, I can do the amendment.
all right, why don't we split it up? I'll do the mini tips and you can do the.
I'll
ones you-
do the amendment. Okay, and Becky, if you can. See
I
if I've
sent it
still
to
got-
Faith, so.
Send it to Faith.
Mhm.
Okay, and we'll
For
get
the
it
record,
up.
who's the reporter?
I am
Thank you.
for the amendment. Okay. Okay, we are now gonna go on to S25 and Michelle Childs is here. And Michelle, can you tell the committee what's happening or what the problem is and why we just got this?
Sure. So is it, do you guys like to share see stuff on the screen, or do you like consulting your own documents, or what's your pleasure?
We usually put it up on the
Everybody has an
screen.
opinion.
That's
Pardon?
that's my screen symbol.
It's Friday afternoon. You see how how excited everyone is.
You would prefer for it to be on the screen, everybody? Okay, sure.
Yep.
And there's a reasonable chance we're all looking at the same thing.
Okay. Can everyone see this? I'm going to show you, I'm going to walk you through the underlying judiciary amendment first. Does that work? So, so there are some fees in S25. They focus on two areas, and this is the addition of advertising fees that relate to the regulation of the new cannabis establishment that will be coming online next year. And so last year when Act 164 passed, I don't know if you recall, but there was a discrepancy or a disagreement between the House and the Senate with regard to the advertising language. And the Senate had put forth a proposal. The House Government Operations kind of expanded that and put that on the floor. But then on the House floor, an amendment passed banning all advertising. So I went back to the Senate and there was a conference committee established. The Senate had some real concerns around constitutional issues of doing a straight up ban of advertising. And so the agreed upon language that was in the conference committee report was for the Attorney General's office, well, for the board, the Cannabis Control Board, working with the Attorney General's office to report back to the General Assembly this April 1st with regard to a proposal for regulating the advertisements for these new cannabis establishments in a way that kind of encompasses the principles that the General Assembly put forth, but to do it in a constitutionally defensible way. Unfortunately, we don't have a board yet. So getting the board up and running has taken much longer than the timeline that you anticipated and put forth in Act 164. And so there's no way, because there's no board, there's no way obviously to get those recommendations April 1st. So what Senate Judiciary decided to do is they took the House Government operations proposal that was voted out of that committee and sent to the floor last year. And they've taken that and they've dropped that in as it passed House Government Operations, and they've put that in S25. They did hear from the Attorney General's office that the Attorney General's office approved of the language, and they felt as though it was defensible. And so that's what you have. So I'm not going to go through the advertising language, but I give you that backstory because one of the things that was contained in that proposal was a requirement that prior to a cannabis establishment publishing their advertisements, they had to submit them to the board for review, and that there would be a cannabis advertising fee associated with that. And so what you have in Section 3 and Section 4 is addressing the advertising fee issues solely. So if you'll see in Section 3, in the language I have up here, and if you're following along at home, it's on page 4, and you'll see just the addition of the fees going into the Cannabis Regulation Fund. The Cannabis Regulation Fund is solely comprised of fees collected by the board, and that fund is what runs the regulatory program. All the tax money goes elsewhere, so the program runs straight up on the fees. So they're adding it in Section 3. And then Section 4, this is the language, the session law language that was in Act 164 that directs the board to do the reporting. And so again, this section is amending and adding that they would be reporting on the fees. And then I'm going to come back, if I can, I'm going to come back to this issue in a moment after Senator Pearson wants to talk to you about another proposal related to this, and I can tie them in together. Senator McDonald, did you have a question?
No, I was trying to find the bill
The
number.
mute button for me?
No.
No question.
Right. Senator Sorokin, did you have a question?
I do have a question. It's not related to the language, but I have a feeling it's going to be somewhat relevant to the rest of this bill. What was the requirement for when the board should have been appointed, and what kind of time frame are we on now? And is there a potential legal challenge to the delay?
The timeline, which I have a timeline all spelled out. I can provide that to you. The board was supposed to have been confirmed by the Senate by January 19th.
So if we got the names tomorrow, we'd have a confirmation period to go through too, right? Right. And so, as I mentioned, the board isn't seated yet. And so we are a few months behind, and Senator Pearson is on the nominating committee. So I would maybe defer to him to address the issues of the whys and how long it may take to get the board seated and such. But we are running at least a few months behind at this point. Okay. Thank you.
So the next changes, and this is a separate issue from advertising fees. And this is in Section 11. And so one of the things that S25 does is it addresses a few issues around social equity. And so you see in Section 11, this has the Cannabis Control Board. They're reporting their recommendation on fees that they are to propose a plan for reducing or eliminating license fees for individuals from communities that have historically been disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition, or individuals directly and personally impacted by cannabis prohibition. And so that's what's in the bill. The issue that I'll just set up, I think that is a big one, is because of the delays, and because the General Assembly is the one that sets the fees, obviously, we're in a bit of a pickle here as to whether or not it's possible to roll out the program next year because of these delays. So according to the Act 164 timeline, the board is supposed to finish their rulemaking and start accepting applications for the new licenses as of next spring. And so if the General Assembly adjourns this and hasn't set the fees, then it's not obviously functional. And so the issue is just out there about what kind of tweaks to Act 164 or what you would include in S25 can you do to still kind of hold out hope that you can still get these new cannabis businesses licensed close to the timeline that you've already set out, because you have to wait until obviously next January to establish the fees, and then you'd have to push something through really quickly. And that doesn't really give applicants a lot of time to consider, the costs associated with the application and the licensing process.
Okay.
Madam,
Yes, Senator Hardy.
sorry, I think Senator Pearson's been trying to talk for a while, so I'll. See.
Okay, I know Senator Pearson has some proposed language, so do you have a question before?
I do have a question. If on the social equity fee part of it, Michelle, is there a definition anywhere for individuals that have been impacted by prohibition or anything, or is it self-certified, or how do
there isn't, and this has been, I imagine if y'all and other committees have been kind of grappling with how do you identify this group, it's been a little tricky for folks. There elsewhere in the bill, there's the creation of a cannabis business development fund, and they specifically use a term around social equity applicants. But what they've done in S25 is have the advisory committee that's within the board be making recommendations as to who qualifies as a social equity applicant, but that definition doesn't exist yet. And and there's just been a lot of discussion around how do you identify for who should qualify for the reduced fees, and they don't want to wait to get a report back or anything like that. They want it to be able to be for you guys to be able to consider those reduced or eliminated fees as soon as possible. And so there isn't a definition of that, but the goal was to not limit it to just race or just people who might have a prior conviction or things like that, because there could be a wide array of ways in which someone was negatively impacted by this prohibition, and so they wanted to leave it a little bit open. So it would be up to the board to be making the recommendation about who they think qualifies under that.
Okay, so there may be some kind of application process or certification process, or at least a definition process that the board.
Yes.
With. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, Senator Pearson.
So just a question for Michelle, and then I'm happy to get into my issue if you're ready, Madam Chair.
Yes, I think so.
I think you said when you were talking about the timeline that the law lays out this fee thing, that the board was supposed to come to the legislature, I think April 1st, and then start issuing permits. And you said, I think you said next spring, but actually, if I recall, some of the permits get issued, for the grows and other processors sooner than that, right? Because the idea, as we conceived, was that stores, at least integrated licenses, could open as early as April 22, right?
Right. I can't remember if they start accepting I think they start accepting applications March 1st of next year.
Okay. except for the small
I'm
growth.
from Georgia, so I still think of March as spring, although I realize it doesn't count up. Sorry.
The small, because there's some permits that start getting issued or accepted. So you need to have a fee, I think, by the time you accept an application, which is different from granting a permit. And I thought some of the permits might even be, applications might start coming in this fall. In order, no, I'm totally misread. Okay.
No, I can email all of y'all in Faith the timeline while we're discussing.
Senator Hardy, among others, will like that because it's a good chart, if I recall.
Yes, thank you.
So the details of the timing are important. The details of the fees, the committee will remember the fees are supposed to support the regulation, the board itself, their own staffing and infrastructure. They are meant to imagine to be offering different fees for different licenses. And then even some of those licenses, say a growing license, would have different tiers, it's been imagined. And obviously, if you have a big grow, it's different fee than if you have a 1,000 square foot grow. The reason that we have wrestled with setting the fees is that we have wrestled with how many kinds of businesses do we want? Do we want to have 5 big ones and 100 little ones, et cetera, et cetera? Figuring that balance out is tricky. Then figuring out how many you think we need versus how much money do we need to raise to get this whole thing going is even more tricky. What we face now is the choice of either us figuring it out or not doing anything and losing an entire year where the board would come back to us in January for us to approve the fees. Neither of them seem practical to me. We don't have the capability, I don't think, to figure it out because there's so many interconnected pieces. And I'm not interested, and I don't think others are interested, now that we've taken this leap, in losing another year. So what, and Michelle has kindly drafted some language. What I would propose we do is maintain that structure where the board comes up with a proposal for the fees. But since we won't be around to then approve them, they bring those proposed fees, which are temporary fees for the first year, to the Joint Fiscal Committee. And only after the Fiscal Committee acts to approve them would those fees go into place so that the board could start accepting applications. So that's the concept that what we've got. Michelle and Anthea can walk us through how it goes, but that's what I'm hoping we can do because, and if we don't want to do it here, we could potentially still do it this year. But I like that this becomes the cannabis sort of update bill and is webbed together. And I think that has some benefits for us as we head to the other body. So anyway, that's the concept and appreciate folks thinking about it.
Okay, committee, any questions? I'm not seeing any. Michelle, can you put the new wording up? Senator Hardy?
I was just going to ask if we could go through the amendment because there's a lot crossed out and I was wondering what's crossed out and what's new. So,
Sure. Did you want me to just show you the timeline real quick on some of those dates or just go straight to the amendment?
Senator Hardy?
If you sent us the timeline, I can look at it on my own or on the side.
Okay.
As long as everyone else is okay with
Or
it.
if you send it to Faith, she'll send it to us.
Yep, and I sent it to all of y'all as well as to Faith. And they start accepting applications in April 1st of next year. And that is because we have to wait for the board to go through the rulemaking process, adopt the rules, and in order so that everybody knows what rules they're applying under. So, okay, I will share. Sorry, I have 2. Okay, so you should have Senator Pearson's amendment up. I drafted it as a committee amendment just because I know everything's moving fast right now. So what this does is it strikes the section 4 in the judiciary proposal of amendment, which that section is amending section 5 of Act 164 from last year that required the board to report to you on April 1st. So they can't do it. So it essentially strikes that language. So if you see there, and starting on line 19 is all of that language that struck through is all the stuff around fees that they were supposed to report to you on. But no, don't worry, because it's coming back in the second instance of amendment in section 4A. And the alternative we came up with for your consideration is for the recommendations to go to the Joint Fiscal Committee instead of the General Assembly. And so you'll see there the new section 4A, and subsection A is that on or before August 1st of this year, the board would provide draft recommendations to the Joint Fiscal Committee for its approval on the following. And then there's just the same list of items that was contained in Act 164 for reporting, plus the new language on line 13 and 14 for including the advertising review fee. And so they would report to the committee as of August 1st. Then on subsection B, you'll see on, sorry, I can't see my page numbers with the split screen, but you'll see that within 30 days of receiving the proposal from the board, the committee shall review the recommendations at its regularly scheduled meeting and provide feedback to the board for any suggested changes. And then C, the board shall revise the proposal if necessary to incorporate the committee's recommendations and present a revised draft for approval to the committee at its next regularly scheduled meeting. D states that the fees are to take effect upon approval by the committee. So the committee has to approve them and then they'll take effect. And then after that, so that's just kind of a stopgap measure for this year so that the whole program doesn't come to a halt because there aren't any fees. In the future, it'll just be part of the regular fee bill process. So it's
Okay, Michelle,
yep.
I'm trying to line up the dates. They have until August 1st to report to joint fiscal.
Yes.
Memory serves me. Joint fiscal meets in July and November. I'm not clear if we have a meeting in October. So if it doesn't come in until August, we can't do it until November. I just want to make sure we get the dates.
Sure, I didn't realize I thought that they met more frequently, but that was.
This past year, we met weekly, so I'm kind of
Right.
thrown off we may have a regular meeting in October.
I mean,
But
you
we
don't, I just created that. I mean, you could say the board shall have a meeting specifically on this. I mean, you could put it for the July meeting, but again, there's no board.
Yeah, no,
when there will be.
let's just say they shall consider it. Joint fiscal shall consider it. Well, let me try emailing Steve Klein or Catherine and asking when we meet. Or I can look it up. So keep going and I'll.
Okay, so the timing, obviously you can play around with that. You just want to make sure that.
Would we be safer to, I see what you're doing, Michelle, and I liked the idea of you don't want to force them to meet specially, but you also don't want the legislature suddenly to start delaying. And so you've said within 30 days of receiving the proposal, which keeps a little heat on the Joint Fiscal Committee. But if we took that 30 days out, then, and frankly, took out regularly scheduled meeting, then you've left it firmly in the hands of the Fiscal Committee.
Mhm.
and we're not in trouble if they meet on the 35th day or something. Would that be wiser, Madam Chair?
Yeah, I've just sent an email to Steve Klein just asking. There may well be one in October. And if there is, then if it comes in August, we can do one in October and one in November.
I also wonder, Michelle, about just saying September 1st, because there's a lot of work that goes in before they craft these, and it wouldn't shock me if joint fiscal didn't meet in August. So
No, we don't meet in August. We meet in July, usually the end of July.
So may I suggest we make it September 1st. We take out that 30-day stopwatch, and we just take out the regular scheduled meetings so that we're not binding ourselves in any weird way that we don't quite mean to. And that way we give the board a little bit more time, and we make sure that the Joint Fiscal Committee doesn't inadvertently trip some calendar, but we still have ourselves, we're not stuck in this weird time where we don't have anything sorted out because of the messed up timeline.
This is an S bill, right?
Yes.
So if there's a problem, it can get corrected. Okay.
Are people comfortable with those modifications? So we make it September 1st, we take out the within 30 days, and we take out regularly scheduled meetings so that it's just a little more fluid.
Senator Hardy.
I'm fine with that as long as, Madam Chair, since you're on the committee, you're okay with that.
I mean, knowing that this isn't the last stop, I'm okay with leaving it the way it is. And if it turns out the timeline doesn't work, given the history of cannabis bills, that'll be the least of the problems to correct. There's time to correct it.
What happened?
I don't know if Steve Klein is sitting there watching his email, anticipating my missive. So, Senator Sirotkin.
What happens if the names of the board are further delayed?
I mean, at some point, we're just pushing into January in terms of this question. But again, we're trying not to just sort of back into being a year late. That's my goal.
So if the board gets named, this gives us time to move forward in our present time frame. If the board doesn't get named, then we got a whole new kettle of fish here. Does that work?
The existing law, one that the legislature has to approve these fees? Is that the way it works now?
Yes.
They're to bring them to us by April 1st. So that would be a remarkable feat.
McDonald.
Madam Chair, I believe existing law is that all fees must be approved by the legislature. I recounted a past time when the legislature went and passed a statute that said that the taxes would be X if the federal government did Y when we were absent. And that was challenged on its constitutionality, but before the court, this case was heard, the legislature had resumed in January and retroactively, and had approved the fees that had been established that had been challenged. So I would suspect that I don't believe we can, maybe we can, but authorize.
Delegate our
fees.
taxing authority, but I'm not sure that fees are there. And yeah, you joined us. Can you help us?
I brought in a pinch hitter.
So for the record, Anthea Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel, filling in for Becky Wasserman, who needed to be someplace else. And
We
I
set
am
out to
here-
draft a whole bunch of other stuff.
So I'm here exclusively to answer this question, and I consulted with Becky in advance. I am not aware of the specific case that you are speaking of, but it does sound like it had to do with the authority to tax. Based on language in 32 VSA section 603 subdivision 1, and you'll see in the language that Michelle put up, that's what's being not withstood here. It says any new fees shall be established solely by act of the General Assembly, which will designate the service or product provided or regulatory function performed for which the fee is to be charged. So one, we're notwithstanding that. Two, it's within the General Assembly's authority to set fees, which is being delegated to the Joint Fiscal Committee. That is more specific than this general, the General Assembly must set fees. So the specific supersedes the general. And there are sort of two instances, setting aside the fact that the Joint Fiscal Committee has been used for the fee process in other instances, which is where this language is partially drawn from. In subdivision 2, certain recalculations of fees is left to the Joint Fiscal Committee in the ordinary course. And the approach that's being taken with the Joint Fiscal Committee being sort of as the seal of approval of the General Assembly writ large when you're not in session is similar to the process that was taken with the CRF money, with the Joint Fiscal Committee sort of going through this money going back into the pot, redistributing, which, as your chair mentioned, is why the Joint Fiscal Committee met so much over the last year. So we do think that this is something that is within the General Assembly's power to delegate to Joint Fiscal, and it would be within Joint Fiscal Committee's power to approve the fees under the sort of revamped timeline structure in the amendment.
Madam Chair, that silenced me.
That is a first, Senator.
And
Anthea,
should
can you stay
anyone-
with us for a while?
Nice job,
Anyone go
Anthea.
in
That is my sole
challenge?
answer. Michelle has all of the other answers, or we'll find them for you. This was my.
I just
one
want you to silence Senator McDonald so we can get out of here before midnight.
And in the event that someone challenges, the legislature will probably come back in January and forestall the court case. Okay, thank you, Madam
And-
Chair, for bringing in a witness. Hallelujah.
And you are then providing a little bit of sort of consistency for the individuals who would be applying for these applications. And I think Michelle said April as to what those fees are apt to be if it does turn out, and we don't think it would, that it would need to be something that the General Assembly would adopt.
Okay.
So
So,
so I did make those amendments as Senator Pearson just suggested. Do you want me to pop those up on the screen just so you can see them? And
Are
there it goes.
okay. So you'll see there, so changing the August 1st to September 1st. And then going down here and just instead of saying within the 30 days, say upon receiving the proposal, the committee, regularly scheduled, that's gotta go, sorry. And provide feedback to the board, and then C, I took out the language around the regularly scheduled meeting, so.
Okay.
Great. And Michelle, you, for the committee's knowledge, it's a little tricky. It's a little bit like the rules. When we're reviewing rules, the legislature can't direct changes, but clearly here, the committee has to approve them. So if they say, geez, why didn't you do X, Y, and Z? The board will be able to say, here's the updated version of our recommendation with X, Y, and Z. And so the power retains with the Joint Fiscal Committee are sort of acting on our behalf. So I thought that was well crafted as trying to hold on to that balance and not, trip us up as much as we could think it through.
And I had shared with Senator Pearson that something similar happens with the legislative review of judicial rules. So the Joint Judicial Rules Committee has the ability to object to proposed court rules, but to try to avoid a last minute objection and stalemate, there's usually a dialogue between the court and the legislature, and they send the proposed rules over, and legislators can say, this, we'd like a tweak to that, and then they go back and then they come back with it. So
It is the most boring committee I have ever served on as a non-lawyer. I think it was my first year. Yeah.
It is a bit of a niche.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not a lawyer, you just kind of sit there and your head spins. It's as
Even
bad
if you
as
are.
Yes, if you are, you like to get into that, but it was
Also,
as
I did want to let you know is that this is based loosely on something, an existing law under Title 22 with regard to the Vermont State Web Portal. There's a process there, and that was established in, I think, Section 953 for something kind of similar to this, where they're recommending things to Joint Fiscal Committee. Joint Fiscal Committee has the ability to approve or reject. So it's not exactly like that, but just as another kind of some support for that. This isn't creating something new that you've never done before.
Okay, committee, what's your pleasure?
Madam Chair, can I ask a question of
Yes.
Michelle? Is this the only thing in this bill that is relevant to the Finance Committee that we have to deal with today? Or is there something else? It's just okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Well, the advertising fee, the reduction
Right.
fee for historically disadvantaged, and then this proposal on top of that.
Okay, but those two fees would be sort of incorporated into this process, right? Yeah.
Okay,
Are all those provisions in draft 2.1, 12:10 PM?
I've got 3.2.
3.2.
Okay,
Okay, I
draft
need-
3.2, 12 PM on the 12th, or would you have a different?
3.2, 3:17 PM. I haven't emailed that out to folks. I just did it while we were talking.
So the one here says 3/19, 2021.
that's the same date. It's at 3:17 is the time.
Okay, 3/19. Thank you.
Okay. But I need a motion. I think that, go
Madam
ahead.
Chair, I'm happy to move that committee amend S25 as it came to us with draft 3.2.
Okay. Further discussion? If not, I think, Michelle, if you take that down, I can actually see if they're voting.
Sorry.
See them so they can vote. All right. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Are there 7 of us here? Yeah. So that carries 700. And Senator Pearson, I assume you're gonna be the reporter.
Sure, happy to.
And
Okay.
And that it be reported favorably when so amended?
Oh, yes.
Ah, yes, you made that motion, right? Okay. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, hearing no negatives, that carries 700, and we will send it to Senator Pearson. We can send it to Secretary Bloomer. And that's it. We were looking at a really light week next week, but I think we'll try and start working through some of Steve Whitaker's issues, and that might tie up very well with the telecom plan that's coming. I'm going to set a bar at the last 3 years, maybe. I'm not going back to sins of 1987. But to see if we can figure out if there's something we can do going forward, short of requiring the governor to put more people in there, which I think would help. You got 3 people in the, you know, the commissioner's got 2 and herself working on broadband, which may be a source of some of the problems, but we shall see. So have a good weekend. We'll see everybody on Tuesday. At least that's my plan at this point for me. If I'm not here, I'll be in touch with Senator McDonald.